The morning sun cast long shadows across the pastures of the Iron Mountain Ranch in eastern Colorado, as rancher Jase Mitchell made his daily rounds to check on the horses that were not only his livelihood, but also his pride and joy. What he discovered in the far paddock on that crisp September morning in 1896 would shatter his peaceful world and expose a web of cruelty and corruption that reached into the highest levels of his community. Thunder, a magnificent black stallion that Jase had raised from a foal and trained to become one of the finest cutting horses in the territory, stood alone in the corner of the paddock with his head hanging low, displaying obvious signs of pain and distress that immediately alarmed his owner. The horse that had always greeted Jase with enthusiasm and energy now barely acknowledged his approach. Flinching away from human contact in a manner that suggested recent trauma, Jase operated the Iron Mountain Ranch on 12,000 acres of prime grazing land in the Arkansas River Valley, about 40 miles southeast of Colorado Springs, where he had built a reputation as one of the territory's most skilled horse trainers and breeders. His operation specialized in producing cutting horses for ranchers throughout the West, and Thunder represented the pinnacle of his breeding program, a horse whose intelligence, agility, and temperament made him worth more than most men earned. In 5 years, at 35, Jase had devoted his entire adult life to understanding horses and developing training methods that produced exceptional animals, without resorting to the harsh techniques that many trainers considered necessary. His gentle but firm approach had earned him respect throughout Colorado territory and had made his horses highly sought after by ranchers who valued both performance and temperament in their working animals. But as Jase approached Thunder for his morning inspection, he could see immediately that something terrible had happened to the stallion during the night. The horse's flanks showed fresh welts and bruises that could only have been caused by repeated blows from a whip or club, while his behavior indicated the kind of fear and trauma that resulted from systematic abuse rather than accidental injury. "Easy, boy," Jase said softly as he approached Thunder, speaking in the calm, reassuring tone that had always been effective in calming nervous horses. "Let me see what someone did to you." Thunder's reaction to Jase's approach was heartbreaking. The stallion shied away from the man who had raised him, showing fear of human contact that was completely contrary to his normal trusting and affectionate nature. The transformation in the horse's behavior was so dramatic that Jase immediately understood he was looking at evidence of deliberate cruelty rather than any kind of accident or natural cause. The examination that followed revealed extensive bruising along Thunder's ribs and flanks, along with cuts and welts that indicated prolonged beating with various implements. Most disturbing was evidence that the abuse had been systematic and prolonged, suggesting that whoever had harmed Thunder had taken pleasure in inflicting pain on a defenseless animal. "Who did this to you?" Jase whispered as he carefully examined the stallion's injuries, his voice filled with a mixture of rage and heartbreak that reflected both his love for the horse and his outrage at the cruelty that had been inflicted. The investigation that Jase immediately began revealed that Thunder had not been the only victim. 3 other horses in the paddock showed similar signs of abuse, though none as severe as the damage that had been inflicted on the valuable stallion. The pattern of injuries suggested that the attacks had been carried out by multiple people working together, indicating a coordinated assault rather than random vandalism. Jase's first instinct was to contact Sheriff William Bradley, but his examination of the crime scene revealed evidence that made him question whether local law enforcement could be trusted to investigate the attacks properly. Hoofprints and other signs around the paddock suggested that the perpetrators had been familiar with the ranch layout and had known exactly where to find the most valuable horses. The timing of the attacks was also suspicious, occurring just 2 days before Thunder was scheduled to be sold to a wealthy rancher from Texas, who had offered an unprecedented price for the stallion. The coincidence suggested that the abuse might have been intended to damage Thunder's value or prevent the sale entirely, pointing to motives that went beyond simple cruelty to animals. Tom, Jase said to his foreman, Tom Carson, who had worked at the ranch for 8 years and was one of the few people Jase trusted completely, "I want you to think carefully about who knew that Thunder was being sold this week, and who might have reasons to want to prevent that sale." Tom's response revealed information that Jase had not previously considered, involving business rivalries and personal conflicts that had been building in the community for months without his awareness. "Boss," Tom said, "there's been talk in town about how much money you're making from horse sales, and some folks aren't happy about an outsider doing so well when local ranchers are struggling. There's also been some bad feelings about you turning down that partnership offer from the Harmon brothers." The Harmon brothers, Buck and Wade, owned the largest ranch in the county and had been trying for 2 years to convince Jase to merge his horse operation with their cattle business. Their proposal would have made DJs a junior partner in a larger operation while giving them control over his breeding program and training methods. Jase's refusal to accept their terms had created tension that he had hoped would fade over time. But Tom's observation about community resentment toward Jase's success revealed a broader pattern of jealousy and hostility that the rancher had been too focused on his work to notice. As an outsider who had arrived in Colorado from Kentucky 5 years earlier, DJs had always been somewhat isolated from the social networks that connected established local families. But his success had apparently made that isolation more problematic than he had realized. The veterinary examination that Dr. Samuel Peterson conducted on Thunder and the other injured horses confirmed Jase's assessment of the severity of the abuse, while also revealing details about the implements that had been used and the methods that had been employed to inflict maximum pain and damage. Dr. Peterson said, after completing his examination, "Whoever did this knew exactly how to hurt these horses without killing them. This wasn't random violence, it was calculated cruelty, designed to cause suffering and destroy the animals' trust in humans." Dr. Peterson's professional assessment carried additional weight because of his 20 years of experience treating injured animals throughout the territory. His conclusion that the attacks represented systematic torture rather than simple abuse had legal implications that could make the difference between misdemeanor vandalism charges and felony animal cruelty prosecutions. But Dr. Peterson also shared information that suggested the attacks on Jase's horses might be connected to similar incidents that had occurred at other ranches in the area, indicating a pattern of animal abuse that had been overlooked or ignored by local authorities. There have been 3 other cases of horse abuse in this county over the past 6 months, Dr. Peterson told Jase privately. In each case, the attacks occurred just before valuable animals were scheduled to be sold or shown. And in each case, the local sheriff concluded that there wasn't enough evidence to pursue prosecutions. The revelation that Jase's horses were part of a broader pattern of attacks transformed his understanding of what had happened, and suggested that he was dealing with organized criminal activity rather than isolated incidents of cruelty or vandalism. The investigation begins Jase Mitchell's decision to conduct his own investigation into the attacks on his horses, rather than relying solely on local law enforcement, required him to develop detective skills and legal knowledge that went far beyond his expertise as a horse trainer and rancher. But his determination to find the people responsible for torturing Thunder and the other horses drove him to pursue justice with the same dedication and attention to detail that had made him successful in his legitimate business. The first breakthrough in Jase's investigation came when he discovered that all 4 ranches that had experienced horse abuse incidents were owned by newcomers to the area, who had achieved notable success in businesses that competed directly with established local operations. The pattern suggested that the attacks were not random acts of cruelty, but rather part of a systematic campaign to drive successful outsiders out of the community. "Tom," Jase said, as they reviewed the information he had gathered about the other victims, "it looks like someone is targeting ranchers who are doing well enough to threaten the established power structure in this county." Tom's knowledge of local politics and social dynamics provided crucial context for understanding the motives behind the attacks and identifying the people who might be involved in organizing them. "Boss," Tom replied, "the Harmon brothers have been complaining for months about newcomers taking business away from families who've been here for generations. They've been pushing the idea that outsiders don't understand local ways and can't be trusted to be good neighbors." The investigation that Jase conducted revealed that the campaign against successful newcomers extended beyond animal abuse to include business interference, social ostracism, and economic pressure designed to force targeted individuals to leave the area or accept subordinate roles in the local economy. Evidence of this broader campaign included testimony from other newcomers who had experienced mysterious equipment failures, unexplained supply delays, and social exclusion that had made their businesses difficult to operate successfully. The pattern suggested a coordinated effort to maintain the economic dominance of established families by eliminating competition from outsiders. But Jase's most significant discovery came when he learned that Sheriff Bradley, the man responsible for investigating the horse abuse cases, was related by marriage to the Harmon family and had business interests that would benefit from the elimination of successful competing ranchers. Dr. Peterson, Jase said during one of their private conversations about the investigation, I'm beginning to think that the reason these animal abuse cases aren't being solved is that the people responsible have protection from law enforcement. Dr. Peterson's response confirmed Jase's suspicions, while also revealing the extent of corruption that had made the campaign against newcomers possible. Dr. Peterson said, "I've been documenting evidence of animal abuse for 6 months, and I've provided detailed reports to Sheriff Bradley about each incident. He's ignored all of my recommendations for follow-up investigations and has refused to pursue any of the leads I've provided." The realization that local law enforcement was either incompetent or complicit in the attacks forced Jase to consider alternative approaches to achieving justice for the crimes that had been committed against his horses and the other victims of the abuse campaign. Working with Dr. Peterson and several other community members who had been targeted by the intimidation campaign, Jase developed a strategy that involved gathering evidence of the crimes while also building political support for bringing in outside law enforcement authorities who could investigate without conflicts of interest. The key to their strategy was documenting not just the animal abuse incidents, but also the broader pattern of corruption and intimidation that had made those incidents possible. This approach required them to collect evidence about business interference, official misconduct, and conspiracy that went far beyond the original horse abuse cases. Dr. Peterson, Jase said as they planned their approach, "We need to show that the attacks on our animals are part of a larger criminal enterprise that includes corruption of public officials. If we can prove that, we can get federal authorities involved who won't be influenced by local politics." The evidence process required Jase and his allies to document incidents and collect testimony, while avoiding detection by the people they were investigating. This covert operation tested Jase's courage and commitment, while also revealing the extent of community support for their efforts to expose the truth. The breakthrough that transformed their investigation came when Tom Carson provided information about a planned attack on another newcomer's ranch that would allow them to catch the perpetrators in the act and gather the kind of evidence that could not be ignored or dismissed by corrupt officials. "Boss," Tom said during one of their clandestine meetings, "I overheard Buck Harmon talking to his crew about teaching another lesson to someone who doesn't know their place. They're planning to hit the Morrison Ranch tomorrow night." The Morrison Ranch belonged to Robert Morrison, a former cavalry officer who had established a successful horse breeding operation that competed directly with the Harmon brothers' business interests. Morrison had been experiencing the same kind of harassment and intimidation that had affected other successful newcomers. But an attack on his animals would provide the evidence needed to expose the entire conspiracy. Jase's decision to intervene in the planned attack required him to risk his own safety while also coordinating with territorial authorities who could arrest the perpetrators and prevent local officials from covering up the crimes. Dr. Peterson Jase said as they finalized their plans, "We get one chance to catch these people and gather evidence that will hold up in court. If we fail, they'll know we're investigating them, and they'll either escalate their attacks or find ways to silence us permanently." The night of the planned attack would test everything that DJs had learned about investigation and evidence gathering, while also determining whether justice could triumph over corruption in a community that had allowed cruelty and intimidation to flourish unchecked. Catching the criminals. Night operation that Jase Mitchell orchestrated to catch the horse abusers in the act required careful coordination between multiple participants and precise timing to ensure that the perpetrators could be apprehended with sufficient evidence to guarantee successful prosecutions despite the corruption that had previously protected them from consequences. Territorial Marshal Robert Harrison had agreed to participate in the operation after reviewing the evidence that Jase and Dr. Peterson had compiled about the pattern of animal abuse and official misconduct that had characterized the attacks on newcomers' ranches. Marshal Harrison's involvement ensured that arrests could be made by federal authorities who were not subject to local political influences. "Mr. Mitchell," Marshal Harrison said during their final planning meeting, "the evidence you've gathered suggests organized criminal activity that goes beyond simple animal cruelty. If we can catch these people in the act, we can prosecute them under federal laws that carry much more serious penalties than local animal abuse statutes." The plan that Jase developed involved positioning witnesses and law enforcement personnel around the Morrison Ranch to observe and document the planned attack, while also ensuring that the perpetrators could be arrested before they could inflict serious harm on the animals they intended to torture. Robert Morrison had agreed to cooperate with the operation despite the personal risk involved, understanding that his participation was essential for gathering the evidence needed to stop the campaign of intimidation that had been targeting successful newcomers throughout the county. Jase Morrison said, as they prepared for the night's events, "I've been a soldier, and I understand the importance of taking risks to protect people who can't protect themselves. These horses deserve justice, and so do all the other people who've been victimized by this conspiracy." The surveillance operation began at sunset, with Jase, Dr. Peterson, Marshal Harrison, and several deputies taking concealed positions around the Morrison Ranch buildings and paddocks where the attacks were expected to occur. Their plan required them to remain hidden while observing the perpetrators' actions, documenting their methods, and identifying all participants before making arrests. The waiting period tested everyone's patience and resolve, as they had no guarantee that the planned attack would actually occur, or that they would be able to gather sufficient evidence to support prosecutions, even if it did take place. But shortly after midnight, the sounds of approaching horses confirmed that the operation was proceeding as planned, and the observers watched as 6 men rode onto the Morrison Ranch property carrying whips, clubs, and other implements designed to inflict pain on the horses they intended to torture. "There's Buck Harmon," Jase whispered to Marshal Harrison as they watched the attackers dismount and approach the horse paddock. "And his brother Wade is with him, along with 4 of their ranch hands." The systematic nature of the attack that followed confirmed everything that Jase and Dr. Peterson had theorized about the perpetrators' methods and motivations. The attackers worked with practiced efficiency, separating the horses and using their weapons to inflict maximum pain, while avoiding injuries that would kill the animals immediately. The cruelty that Jase witnessed was even worse than what he had imagined, based on the evidence from previous attacks. The perpetrators clearly took pleasure in the suffering they were inflicting, laughing and encouraging each other as they tortured animals that had no way to defend themselves or escape from their tormentors. "Marshal," Dr. Peterson whispered, as they documented the attack, "this is exactly what happened to Thunder and the other horses. These men are professional animal abusers who know exactly how to inflict maximum suffering." The arrests that followed caught the perpetrators completely by surprise, as they had assumed that their previous immunity from prosecution would continue to protect them from consequences for their criminal activities. "You're all under arrest for conspiracy, animal cruelty, and violation of federal laws regarding interstate commerce," Marshal Harrison announced as his deputies surrounded the attackers. "Drop your weapons and put your hands where we can see them." Buck Harmon's reaction to the arrests revealed both his shock at being caught and his confidence that local authorities would protect him from serious consequences. Marshal Buck said, as he was being handcuffed, "I think you're making a big mistake. Sheriff Bradley knows all about our activities, and he's never had any problem with what we've been doing. That's exactly why federal authorities are handling this case." Marshal Harrison replied, "Sheriff Bradley is also under investigation for official misconduct and conspiracy." The evidence that was gathered during the arrests included not only documentation of the attack itself, but also testimony from the perpetrators about previous incidents and the broader conspiracy that had made their activities possible. Wade Harmon's attempt to negotiate a reduced sentence by providing information about other participants and victims revealed the full scope of the intimidation campaign that had been targeting successful newcomers throughout the region. "We've been doing this for 2 years, Wade admitted during his interrogation. "The idea was to make life so difficult for outsiders that they'd either leave or agree to work for us instead of competing with us." The interrogations that followed, the arrests exposed not only the animal abuse conspiracy, but also the broader network of corruption that had allowed it to operate without interference from local authorities. Sheriff Bradley's arrest on charges of conspiracy and official misconduct eliminated the protection that had allowed the Harmon brothers and their associates to operate with impunity, while also sending a clear message that federal authorities would not tolerate corruption that enabled criminal activities. The trial that followed became a sensation throughout Colorado Territory, attracting attention from newspapers and reformers who saw the case as a test of whether justice could triumph over corruption in frontier communities where powerful families had traditionally operated above the law. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," said Prosecutor Margaret Sullivan during her opening statement, "this case is about more than animal cruelty. It's about whether we will allow criminal conspiracies to drive honest people out of our communities through intimidation and violence." The testimony that Jase provided about the attack on Thunder and his investigation of the broader conspiracy demonstrated how individual courage and determination could expose criminal activities that had been protected by corrupt officials. "Mr. Mitchell," Prosecutor Sullivan asked during his testimony. What motivated you to risk your own safety to investigate these crimes when local law enforcement had shown no interest in pursuing justice? Thunder and the other horses couldn't speak for themselves, Jase replied. Someone had to stand up for them, and for all the other victims of this conspiracy. If we allow cruelty to go unpunished, we become complicit in it ourselves. Justice and redemption, the conviction of Buck and Wade Harmon, along with their 4 associates and Sheriff Bradley, on federal charges of conspiracy, animal cruelty, and corruption marked the beginning of a transformation in the Colorado community that extended far beyond the immediate punishment of the criminals who had tormented innocent animals and terrorized honest business people. The sentences imposed by federal Judge Charles Patterson reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and the need to send a clear message that organized criminal activity would not be tolerated in territories seeking statehood and recognition as civilized communities. Buck Harmon and Wade Harmon, Judge Patterson announced during the sentencing hearing. You are each sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy and animal cruelty, along with substantial fines and restitution to your victims. Your actions have disgraced this community and violated the basic principles of decency that must govern human behavior. The imprisonment of the Harmon brothers eliminated the leadership of the intimidation campaign, while also removing their economic and political influence from the community power structure that had enabled their criminal activities. Sheriff Bradley's conviction and removal from office created opportunities for reform in local law enforcement that would prevent future corruption and ensure that all residents received equal protection under the law, regardless of their origins or economic status. The appointment of former Territorial Marshal Robert Harrison as the new sheriff brought experienced and honest law enforcement to the county, while also demonstrating the community's commitment to maintaining the standards of justice that had been established through the successful prosecutions. Citizens of this county, Sheriff Harrison said during his installation ceremony, you can be assured that this office will investigate all crimes thoroughly and prosecute all criminals fairly, regardless of their social position or political connections. But the most significant long-term impact of the successful prosecutions was the transformation of community attitudes toward newcomers and the recognition that diversity and competition actually strengthened, rather than threatened, local economic development. The business success that Jase and other targeted newcomers achieved after the elimination of the intimidation campaign demonstrated that their economic activities had been beneficial rather than harmful to the broader community's prosperity. Jase's horse breeding and training operation expanded significantly once he no longer faced harassment and interference, creating jobs for local workers while also attracting customers from throughout the West who contributed to the area's economic development. Tom Jase said as they watched workers constructing new facilities for the expanded ranch operation. It's amazing how much we can accomplish when we don't have to spend time and energy defending ourselves from people who should have been supporting community development. The rehabilitation of Thunder and the other abused horses provided a powerful symbol of recovery and healing that inspired the broader community's efforts to overcome the damage caused by years of corruption and intimidation. Thunder's return to full health and performance capabilities demonstrated both the resilience of innocent victims and the possibility of recovery from even severe trauma when proper care and patience were provided. Boy, Jase said as he worked with Thunder in the training ring, you've come through everything they did to you, and you're stronger than ever. You're proof that good can triumph over evil when people are willing to fight for what's right. The success of Thunder's rehabilitation led to Jase developing specialized techniques for helping traumatized horses recover from abuse, creating expertise that benefited animal welfare throughout the region, while also enhancing his reputation as one of the territory's most skilled trainers. The educational programs that Jase established to teach humane animal training methods helped prevent future abuse, while also demonstrating that kindness and patience produced better results than fear and violence in developing relationships between humans and animals. Mr. Mitchell, said Dr. Peterson during one of the training seminars that Jase conducted for other ranchers, what you've developed here represents a complete transformation in how we think about animal welfare and training. Your methods produced better horses while also treating them with the respect they deserve. The marriage between Jase and Sarah Morrison, Robert Morrison's daughter who had moved to Colorado to help manage her father's ranch, created a partnership that combined their shared commitment to animal welfare with complementary skills in business management and community development. Sarah's background in veterinary medicine and her experience with ranch management enhanced Jase's operation while also providing additional expertise for their expanding efforts to promote humane treatment of animals throughout the territory. Sarah said, as they planned their wedding and discussed their future together. What you've accomplished in fighting for justice and protecting innocent animals has shown me the kind of man I want to build a life with. The children that Jase and Sarah raised on the Iron Mountain Ranch grew up understanding both the importance of treating animals with kindness and the responsibility that comes with standing up for justice when others are being victimized by those who abuse their power. The 10th anniversary commemoration of Thunder's rescue and the successful prosecutions that had transformed the community brought together hundreds of people whose lives had been positively affected by Jase's courage in fighting corruption and cruelty. 10 years ago, Jase said during his speech at the anniversary celebration, "I found my best horse beaten and traumatized by people who thought they could abuse the innocent without consequences. What I learned is that standing up for those who can't protect themselves doesn't just help the immediate victims. It helps create communities where everyone can flourish." The monument that was erected to honor Thunder and all the other victims of animal abuse served as a permanent reminder that cruelty would not be tolerated, and that justice would always be pursued, regardless of the power or position of those who committed crimes. Sarah added her reflection on the transformation that had occurred. When Jase chose to fight for Thunder and the other horses, he wasn't just seeking justice for animals. He was fighting for the principle that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak, whether they're horses or people. The legacy of the Iron Mountain Ranch extended throughout Colorado and the broader West as an example of how individual courage and determination could expose corruption, achieve justice, and create lasting positive change in communities that had been damaged by organized criminal activity. The federal legislation that was influenced by the evidence gathered during the Colorado horse abuse prosecutions provided stronger protections for animals throughout the Western territories, while also establishing precedents for prosecuting organized campaigns of intimidation and corruption. Thunder lived to the age of 28, becoming a legend throughout the territory as a symbol of resilience and recovery, while also serving as the foundation for a bloodline of exceptional horses that carried his gentle temperament and remarkable abilities to future generations. The story of Jase Mitchell's fight for justice became part of Colorado's historical record, taught in schools throughout the state as an example of how ordinary citizens could make extraordinary differences when they refused to accept injustice and had the courage to stand up for those who needed protection. If this incredible story about standing up for the innocent and fighting corruption moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories about ordinary people who refuse to let evil triumph. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak, whether they're animals or people. Comment below and tell us about a time when you stood up for someone or something that couldn't protect itself. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspiring stories. Remember, when we choose to fight for justice, we're not just helping the immediate victims. We're creating communities where everyone can flourish.